Hello and welcome to Super Nicktendo's Unscripted podcast. At least that's the working title. Episode 2. This is the second podcast. I'm really excited with the performance of the first one. Thanks again for the outpouring of support. The channel has tripled in size from 9 subscribers to 30, so that's good. The last podcast, at least the recording of this, got 300 views, which is actually like beyond my expectations for the first episode. So I'm really excited to get into the podcast and like get make sure that we get more consistent topics, and I'm just like excited to see like where this goes. So thanks again for everybody who turned out for the first episode. It really means a lot. So, it's one of those things where I didn't really expect to start a podcast, but here we are. So you'll have to notice that I'm wearing headphones this time so that I can actually monitor what I'm speaking. So that way, like, my voice sounds a little bit better. I noticed that last time, like, the microphone got like a little bit too far away and I didn't sound that great. So, that's the podcast life, baby. So, just to kind of go over a couple of questions that I got from the last episode. The first one is that about like a co-host, and no, I'm not going to do a co-host. Basically, I want to have the podcast be just me. It's kind of like a thing that I want to use as a scripting exercise, I suppose, like an unscripted and everything, and create an outline and just have like topics that don't fit on the main channel that can just go. So, and like also it's just for consistency's sake. Like I can film this at 8 o'clock, which is what I'm doing right now, or like if I want to do it a little bit earlier in the morning or a day before or something like that, just to kind of like give myself some time, I can do that. So that's pretty much the reason why I want to go solo. That doesn't mean that I won't have any guests or anything like that. So, as we progress and stuff, like maybe I'll have like a guest host or something like that, or just a segment where I interview somebody or something like that. So stay tuned for that. Basically, and that's really the housekeeping that I wanted to get out of the way first. I did post an actual Super Nicktendo video on grading, which went better than I had hoped. It's always a little scary when I release a topic criticizing a dedicated community. I try to be as respectful as possible, and that usually gets a lot of people. Like I said in my last video, I want people to be like, if they disagree with me, that they still respect my opinion. And to do that, you need to respect other people's opinions and stuff. And that's something that, isn't necessarily beneficial for the algorithm, but it makes me feel good, and that's all that really matters. So that out of the way, let's get into my topics here. So I got a handful of them here. I got some good ones. So I hope that we get a good conversation going. By the way, if you are new to the channel, this is a separate channel. This is Super Nicktendo Freemium. I called it that just because, like all these other YouTubers who have the second channel, like they all took all the good names. Like, you got Spawnwave Plus, and you got Jarvis Johnson Gold, and all these other like second channel things. And I'm like, man, I want a cool second channel name. So I went with Freemium just because like it's free content and it's kind of premium, like, I guess, but you get what you pay for. So I kind of, maybe I'll change it, and I don't know. Let me know in the comments below what you think about it, but I think it was a pretty cool play on words. So let's get things out of the way here. I picked up some things to my collection, but not really video games. So I picked up 2 laser discs. I like collecting laser discs. That's something that has been a lot of fun because they're essentially like just record-sized pieces of movie art, even if like you don't watch them all the time. But they are fun to collect and they're relatively inexpensive. Some of them are pretty pricey, like the Wizard that I got, I paid like $80 for because it is a sought after movie, but it's kind of rare at the same time. Same thing with the Super Mario Brothers movie. I think I paid $50 for that one, but other than that, the rest of them, they cost like a couple of dollars here and there. I picked up City Slickers 1 and 2. Strangely enough, City Slickers 1 was only $3, but City Slickers 2 was $6, which, thinking back, like, I mean, City Slickers 2 wasn't as like iconic as the first one, you know, like the sequels, like back then, like if they get a sequel, like they really just hammed up like the, you know, the zaniness and everything about it. So maybe that's the reason why people like that one better. But I was always a fan of City Slickers 1. You know, it's got that comedy, but still had like some serious aspects to it. But I'm excited to go watch them again. And then I picked up Sliders, the complete set. You guys remember Sliders? I love that show. Like that show, I think it was on Fox first, and then like it moved to the Sci-Fi Channel. And it's like one of my favorite like shows, and it's just a shame that it kind of like went off the rails and stuff. It's a show that not too many people talk about. I wish I had like the more focus to make like a media channel to like talk about that kind of stuff. But maybe down the line, if I ever have enough money to like hire an editor or something like that, because that's like the biggest barrier is, you know, hiring somebody to edit and stuff, because like editing just like takes up the majority of my time. So that's why I do the podcast, because the podcast is a lot easier to manage and everything like that. So that's pretty much what I picked up. You know, I did download that Hi-Fi Rush game from Game Pass, and that, like, I suck at those games so much, and each time I delude myself into thinking that, okay, this is the game that I'm gonna actually be good at, and nope, I can't get into that like rhythm, even though like there's all these other visual cues to, you know, hit the buttons and everything. It's just like I can't get into that stuff. So it's a very pretty game, and the humor is in there and everything like that, but it's just not for me. I also did download the Goldeneye for the Nintendo 64. I have it on Xbox Game Pass because I didn't bother to download the Nintendo 64 expansion pack for the Nintendo Switch Online, just because like Nintendo 64 games, like I like them, but I don't know, like I still like playing them on original hardware, and there's like another subject that I'm going to get into about that in a little bit here, but it plays really well. I know that a lot of people have complained that it's not 60 frames a second, it's 30 frames, and it's like, I get it, like I would prefer it to be closer to that Xbox 360 leak that was a while back, where they used the source code to like really like remaster it. That would have been cool, and I hope down the line that they actually do release it. But you know, it is what it is, and you know, unfortunately, like when it comes to copyright and all this other stuff that, you know, inhibits you know, preservation and access, you know, that's something that we just have to deal with, unfortunately. You know, it's not ideal, and I don't fault people for complaining about it, but you know, unfortunately, like that's one of the reasons why emulation is so popular, is because it doesn't have to you don't have to worry about licensing. You don't have to worry about whether or not you know, a source code was, you know, available or not. You know, you can put it through like all these shaders, and people can create like different HD masks and stuff. So I see what people's problem is, and I understand, but you know, I guess this is it. So maybe hopefully we'll see a remaster, you know, with the success of it. Like, judging by the success, maybe they can use it to be like, okay, like we can do this now. All right, so Let's just jump into it. Let's get into like a couple of topics that I want to talk about. I'll switch it up a little bit because I want to kind of save the one topic for later. That's why there was a cut there. So recently what I've been doing is I've been modding my equipment for RGB. And so for the longest time, I haven't been a person who really cared for the modding scene in that regard. Like there's been just like this chase for having the best picture possible, and that wasn't for me, not necessarily because I don't think that games should be played a specific way. It's just that the way that I have my systems, I really like them stock, and I like to be in that position where I can show people like, hey, this is what it was like in 1985 or something like that. Get as close to the experience as possible. But over time, I've kind of just like I've included a PVM monitor, and I have a mister, and I have all these other like things that have enhanced the actual fidelity of these systems. And so I got a couple of HD or not HD, but RGB mods, and they are fantastic. I got two of them from Voultar. He's got the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 one. And the Super Nintendo one, I have a one chip that has a I put it in a transparent shell, so I was like, well, I might as well mod that one because I at least have a stock Super Nintendo and a Super Nintendo Junior that I can always refer back to. And so that's why I chose to mod it, because at least I still have like that thing. And I also got the Nintendo 64 modded, and so the Nintendo 64 one is an interesting case, because at least with the Super Nintendo, except for the Junior or the Mini, they already output RGB by default. So if you already have like these like the proper cables and everything, you can play that on a PVM, no problem. But the thing with the RGB mod by Voultar is it cleans up the signal a little bit better, and it actually makes it a lot more sharper. And so I did that, and I also got the Nintendo 64 one. And the Nintendo 64 does not output RGB by default. And it's kind of that puzzling thing that Nintendo's gonna Nintendo, right? And like on top of that is that you need a specific Nintendo 64 too. Like you need the first version of it, because later versions, they took it out completely. And so you can only do it with the first generation Nintendo 64s. I don't understand like why Nintendo always thinks to get rid of the video quality. Like they degrade the video quality with each iteration. Like it just doesn't make sense. Like the Nintendo with the top loader that came out to the United States, like they replaced it and it was like RF only. And then the GameCube, it has a digital AV out, and they dropped the AV. It's like, it's the weirdest cost savings that I've seen from Nintendo, like how they go about doing that. So, but it is what it is. But I got these HD retrovision cables for the Super Nintendo, and though, like, if you've never tried the Super Nintendo or the HD retrovision cables, like they are something else. Like I know that they're component cables, and like there's like some science into it. Like it's kind of complicated, but like what it does is it takes the RGB signal and then it converts it into the component. And so it's like magic. So if you tried it and you plug it in, it's like a night and day difference, to the point where that's one of the reasons why I got rid of my analog Super NT, and I'm planning on getting rid of the Mega SG also, because the HD retrovision cables, like they put out such a clean signal on top of the onto a CRT TV. And like if you were to get one of those scalers like the RetroTink, then you could put it onto an HD television too. So there's really no need if you have that information, or even like if you get like a Mister or something like that, there's no reason to have the those analog products. So that's what I went with, and it's just phenomenal. But like I was going to bring up the Nintendo 64 because obviously you have to play some Nintendo 64 to test it out. Like you can't just plug it in and make sure that it works. You got to play some games. And I got to say, like, I know that the Nintendo 64 controller has its flaws, but man, like it just like, it still feels natural to me, but I can tell like certain things just take some getting used to. Like I was playing Mario Kart 64, and like the joystick was so like finicky and stuff. Like maybe I'll get like another, like a modern controller, like one of those retro fighters, but for like a normal 64, it's like, man, like it just, it feels so loose, when it comes into it. So but it was fun to like just go back and like play these games in like a higher fidelity. Even if, I mean, it's not like night and day, but like you can, like the text is clearer, like it feels a little bit closer to something that was like, I mean, it's still very like polygon-y and everything like that. It's like, so it's very 1996, but it feels a little bit closer to a little bit modern. So I do plan on RGB modding other things. I do have an Intellivision that I bought an RGB mod for, and this was before I really knew what I was doing. So I'm gonna reattempt to do that. And same thing with I got the VGA mod for the Virtual Boy, which I have to go back and reattempt to do it. So I mean, modding is fun. It's addicting, but I was always so worried about having consoles that were modded and not being able to go back to the original feel to it. But then again, I just like sucked it up and just I just bought extras. Like I just bypassed that whole problem completely. So yeah, let me know if you guys mod. It's a lot of fun, and like what other mods that I can do for the Nintendo 64 or the Super Nintendo. Recommend me a Nintendo 64 controller. That's not total garbage. All right, so next topic here. We are gonna go through here and all right, here we go. So I've been thinking about this topic for a bit, and so this whole Amico thing that spilled out with Pat the NES Punk with his his Pat the NES Punk Amico Christmas special. So what happened was that people responded to the video, and then so Pat made that a podcast topic. And so he kind of retorted back, and like he pretty much just like went gloves off on everybody who was in that video, especially Smash JT, but he's already responded to it, and so I'm not really going to get too much into that because it's kind of just like a back and forth squabble. But what was really interesting was that Pat Contri called out Brett Weiss. So Brett Weiss, if you aren't aware, he is the author of these omnibus books, along with some other books and everything like that. He, that's pretty much his bread and butter. Like, if you are at a con for any video game thing, you'll probably see Brett Weiss. So he's definitely out there to hustle, and you kind of have to, give credit where credit is due on that specific route. He's got, how many books here? He's got 7 books out. Or no, sorry, 6 books, and the NES Omnibus is like a 1 and 2. Or no. Oh, dang it. Brett, like, your site just, like, is ridiculous here. he's wearing the shirt of his like other book. So he's got 6 books, and the omnibus ones are in 2 volumes. So that's where, like, I got confused here. But anyway, so Brett, if you haven't, he was part of the Amico. Like, I wouldn't consider him too much of, like, part of, like, that whole Amico, After Darks or anything like that. I don't think he participated in any of that. He just, like, enjoyed the console and stuff, and, like, he had some of the weirdest takes on it. So, I mean, whatever. He was excited about it. But the real reason why Pat, like, really went so hard into Brett was because, if you aren't aware, Brett wrote for Pat's ultimate guide to the NES Library. And so, and the issue is that over the past, couple of years, the book came out in 2016, and in 2019, Pat kind of alluded to, he's like, hey, like, I had to rewrite 60 reviews. So there will be a 3.0 book that comes out with the new reviews. And so everybody's like, oh, well, when he actually, like, came out with it, he kind of alluded to, he's like, well, the score is kind of adjusted and everything like that, to more align with the rest of the book. And that's kind of like where he left it. And you're like, oh, okay, like, things change, maybe if you go back and you revisit, opinions change. And I didn't really think of anything of it. I have the 2.0 version, and I'll get to that in a minute. But, so Pat said that he paid Brett for his work for the 60 games. And so, I looked through these reviews, and they're like 200 words a piece. So, I would say that Pat paid Brett and the other writers fairly for their work and everything like that. So I don't really think, that's that big of a deal. But the problem is that Pat said that the reason why he removed those 60 reviews for the 3.0 version was because the work was subpar. He made the accusation that maybe Brett didn't play all of the games that he wrote for, and that he kind of alluded to not necessarily doing all of the work, which is a pretty serious accusation when it comes to writing, especially like if you have like a book with your name on it. So that's pretty serious. And then also he went into it like with Brett with his omnibus books that he doesn't pay the writers. He doesn't pay his writers and everything like that. So whatever. And people kind of like left it at that. Well, almost immediately Brett comes out and he says, he's got like a blog post of it, and it's pretty verbose and it's got a lot of timelines to it. So he says that Brett wasn't notified of the removal, which, for the most part, Pat doesn't necessarily have to like let him know. It's kind of like I don't think that, Pat was in anywhere like obligated to let Brett know that the reviews were modified, but just the way that he goes about it, like, was kind of ridiculous, especially like over time. The way that Pat referred to Brett, not necessarily by name, but like really just like sounded pretty bitter about it. So the story had never come out until now, and it's been like 6 or 7 years now since that initial book was written. So Brett was never notified by the removal, but he says that Brett says that he thinks that he was removed because he wrote the SNES omnibus. And so Brett gives like a timeline of events that happened, and it kind of aligns with it. So Brett wrote for the NES guide, and then Brett decided to make the Super Nintendo omnibus. And if you look through and you flip through the omnibus books, like, they're kind of in the same kind of like similar function of it. It's like the book like has a a lot of like it's got like a basic overview of the game, and it also has these things that Brett calls their insights rather than what Pat calls them, and they're called like reflections. So Pat calls them reflections and Brett calls them insights. And the insights on Brett's book aren't in for every single game. They're in for a decent amount of them. But I don't have Brett's book, and Brett doesn't sell a digital version, so unfortunately I couldn't buy one for to take a look. But if anybody has like a like both of them, like they're not exactly the same, but like they kind of hit the same beats, because I mean there's only so many ways that you can talk about old video games without kind of like overlapping on similarities. But I digress though. But like Brett does address and says that those people were contributors, and that they're not necessarily people who he offered to pay, which I kind of get, because usually when you reach out to people in the industry and you ask them to speak on like a certain subject that they're knowledgeable about, typically when you talk to somebody in the industry and they give you like a brief like blurb, that is something that is just something that they do. They don't really have a speaker fee or a writer's fee or anything like that. So like they kind of just like do it if they have the time and they donate to the book. What Pat did for his book is that he essentially contracted out the reviews for all of these games. Like there's over 800 games. So honestly, if Pat was to do all of it, like play the games and write all of it, like the book would take years, like, you know, a full decade to do. So I get why he did that. And like he also paid, you know, for the people to write for the books. And at least like from what it does, you know, I can assume, and I'm pretty sure that he would like confirm this, but like I'm pretty sure that he also paid for the blurbs that come into this book. Like Norm Caruso and James Wolfe, they also did like certain writings for it, not necessarily reviews, but like just like insights. Like James talk about horror games and, you know, stuff like that. So I don't know if Pat paid those guys, but just based off of like how adamant he is about paying the writers, would assume that Norm and James and everybody else that wrote for the book got at least some kind of compensation for it. But the issue though is that, you know, going back and forth and stuff, I've been like looking over both of these things to see like who's really telling the truth, you know, and because, you know, obviously there are two sides to every story, but it does seem like there's something like in the middle, just based off of it. It seems to me that Pat did decide that Brett's work wasn't up to his liking after the SNES Omnibus was set to release. I really do think that, you know, because at the end of the day, it's Pat's book. Like he's got his freaking name on the thing. So like, and it's really big. So it's not necessarily like you know, like his name is all over the book. So it is his book and it's his work and he worked to put it together. So it is, you know, it's his call if he wants to release the things. But the problem I have, though, is that Pat really goes hard into Brett, saying that his reviews are suboptimal and that they aren't acceptable. Like, you know, like I can understand disagreeing with somebody's rating and maybe adjusting the rating or something like that and overriding that. But like Pat went so far as to say that like they were written by a better author. And like I think Pat rewrote all 60 of them. So that's the thing though, is that what we really should hang on, based off of like the podcast that he announced, that those reviews were based on the fact that Brett did not play those games. So The question is that why did they even make it into the book in the first place? Because at least like from what Brett is saying is that he's saying that he got editorial notes from Pat, and like there was a review that Pat chose to rewrite, but still gave Brett the credit. So it is possible that like Pat looked at his writing, was like, I don't really agree with your specific things, but they do look acceptable, because like it is an editorial decision that you have to make on that. So I think just the way that he worded it, though, like he's saying that they're fraudulent reviews, essentially. To summarize it completely, he's saying that they're fraudulent reviews. So the problem is that they didn't make it into just one book, they made it into two. And that's a big issue if they're fraudulent, because it just makes a thing that Pat didn't fully vet his writers. That's kind of the issue. Is like if you paid 60, if you pay for a writer out of pocket, you're going to make sure that because you have to copyright it to make sure that spelling errors are correct. Like if there's no spelling errors, you also have to check for flow of words, and like the book itself has a cohesive pattern for it. Like Brett's reviews don't stick out from the rest of the book. Like they all kind of like go into the same flow, and like the only difference is that Brett has a little bit more different opinions than Pat. Specifically, if you read through the book, it has like all of this copyrighted to it. Like this isn't a book that just came out and it's printed on some Amazon printing service. Like it's not. This is a book that took a long time to put together. So if Brett's reviews were fraudulent, they should have been caught in the first print run, and they shouldn't have made it out in the first place. And if it came down to it where that was found out before, that would cause a delay to the book, then the book should have been delayed in the first place. This is a printed book. Like I don't have an update for it. So like that's the other thing too. It's like now 3.0 has come by. Pat has claimed that these reviews are no good. So now what do I do now that I'm stuck with a book 2.0? So that's kind of the question that people need to be asking about that. But I really do think that Pat saw that, Brett was making his own books and stuff, and he's coming out with these omnibus, which are kind of similar to Pat's, book and stuff. Like he's talking about each individual game, and then he's also has like certain people in certain games come out with reflections of it or insights. See, I get them confused, but so that's really the issue here, is that I really do think that like Pat just decided like, hey, I don't want this guy in my book anymore. I'm going to take him out. And so I really do think that that's the reason why. We'll see if he responds to Brett's blog on the podcast, because like I'm filming this on Sunday, so I'm going to put a spot right here for an update. Okay, so it looks like he is not going to post the podcast this week. It looks like he's switched to bi-weekly. So I'm just going to go ahead and just launch it. And if he responds the next week, then you'll see an update there. Pretty much like all I have to say on the subject is, because it just really does seem that like Pat just doesn't like Brett. And like that's okay. But like why would you like tell your viewers that you let out a book with subpar reviews for 3 years too? Like the 2.0, I think the 2.0 or the 3.0 version didn't come out until 2019. So that's that's a pretty long time, especially since you're selling all of these books and stuff. And as far as I'm concerned too, I couldn't find it on any site. It doesn't look like he offered to replace any of the books either. So that's another thing. Is like if he decided that he didn't like those reviews and wanted to update them, that's perfectly fine. But you can't just say that they were garbage reviews, and because you still allowed those garbage reviews into the book. So that's really a cause of concern. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit off, but like, let me know what you think. But like, I think that it's kind of weird because, Pat, like, he's like I said in the last episode, like, he holds a grudge, and like, this is this is something that is like, 6 or 7 years in the making. And so like, that's the same thing that happened with the Pro Jared situation too. Like when Pro Jared was getting dragged for his marriage falling apart in the public view, and like sexting fans and doing all this other stuff. Like, Pat had a story that happened a very long time ago, that he's still kind of miffed about, which, hey, okay, but like, still, like, it came out at that specific time, and Pat did allude to, spilling the tea on other creators that he feels have, been out to ruin his career and stuff like that. So this is probably just the beginning, so we'll stay tuned. But anyway, okay, so I'm going to cut it there. We talked long enough on specific topics and everything like that. I'll only keep it up to just those two, specifically the retro modding and the Brett Weiss versus Pat Contri. I went a little bit too overboard. I'm trying really hard to keep these episodes, 45 minutes or less, and like, I came up really close to it. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll save the next two topics for next week. Specifically the gaming gatekeeping and DK oldies scam. So like, it's kind of ambitious of me to try to cram in all those like juicy topics into one episode. So we'll save those for next week, and we'll go from there. But let me know what you guys think about the podcast. What kind of topics do you want me to cover next? And just make sure that you like the video and you subscribe. But yeah, thanks so much for watching or listening, and I will see you guys next week.